There's a smell that doesn't exist in our sanitized modern world. It's not the stench of a neglected wound or forgotten garbage. It's something far more intimate, far more deliberate. It's the smell of your own rotting flesh mixed with the writhing bodies of thousands of maggots. And you paid a fortune for the privilege of lying still while they consume you. This isn't a medieval torture device or some sadistic punishment reserved for criminals. This was medicine. This was luxury. This was what royalty begged their physicians to prescribe when infection turned their skin black and their blood to poison. And here's the part that'll make your stomach turn. They were right to do it. The maggots worked. They worked so well that European nobility spent obscene amounts of money to have living larvae intentionally placed into their open wounds, into their diseased orifices, into places on their bodies that you don't even want to imagine. But it gets worse, because the maggots were just the beginning of a medical tradition, so revolting so completely, divorced from anything resembling modern hygiene, that when you understand how it actually worked, you'll realize that survival in the royal courts of Europe wasn't about strength or divine right. It was about who could endure the most horrifying treatments without losing their mind. And the women, oh, the women had it worst of all. Because the procedures specifically designed for female royalty made the maggot cure look like a spa day. Let me take you inside the chamber of King Louis XIV in 1686. The Sun King, the most powerful monarch in Europe, the man who declared, "I and the state," is lying in his golden bed screaming. The smell is so overpowering that courtiers have to perfume their handkerchiefs just to stand in the room. But here's where it gets medieval. His physician, Charles Francois Felix, decides the only solution is surgery without anesthesia, because anesthesia doesn't exist yet. The procedure takes several attempts over multiple days. But before the surgery can even begin, they need to prepare the wound. And their preparation method involves something that would make modern surgeons vomit. They pack the infected cavity with living blowfly larvae. Not just a few maggots, we're talking about hundreds of them, deliberately cultivated and then carefully placed into the king's rotting flesh. The logic was actually sound in a horrifying way. Maggots only eat dead tissue, not living flesh, so they would clean the wound naturally by consuming the necrotic matter. The royal physicians had noticed this phenomenon on battlefields, where wounded soldiers left untreated somehow healed better than those who received immediate care. What they didn't understand was why, but they knew it worked. So they began breeding specific types of flies, learning which species produced the most efficient larvae, which ones cleaned wounds fastest, which ones were least likely to burrow too deep. This wasn't folk medicine or peasant superstition. This was cutting-edge medical science, practiced on the bodies of kings and queens. But here's what makes this truly disturbing. It became fashionable. Once Louis XIV survived his maggot treatment, having live larvae placed in your wounds became a status symbol among the nobility. If you were rich enough, important enough, royal enough, you too could have your physician prescribe the maggot cure. Women at Versailles began requesting it for infected childbirth tears, for breast abscesses, for venereal sores they'd contracted from their equally diseased husbands. The process was ritualized, turned into theater. The physician would arrive with a special jar, ornate and decorated, containing the precious larvae. He would use silver tweezers to place each maggot individually, counting them out loud so the patient knew exactly how many were being inserted into their body. The patient would then be instructed to lie completely still for hours, sometimes days, while the maggots fed. You could feel them moving, writhing, burrowing slightly as they consumed the dead flesh. Courtiers described the sensation as a tickling at first, and a strange pulling feeling, then eventually a kind of numbness as your brain simply refused to process what was happening anymore. The worst part wasn't the physical sensation, it was the waiting. You couldn't see what was happening inside your body. You could only feel the movement and trust that the maggots knew the difference between dead tissue and living flesh. Because if they didn't, if they got confused, if they decided that healthy tissue tasted just as good, There was nothing anyone could do to stop them. You just had to hope that the creatures eating you from the inside would know when to stop. The maggots would be left in place until they reached a certain size, until they'd consumed enough necrotic tissue to grow fat and sluggish. Then came the removal, which might be even worse than the insertion. The physician would use those same silver tweezers to extract each larvae, one by one, pulling them out of wounds that had now been cleaned down to raw, bleeding flesh. The maggots would be counted again to make sure none had been left behind, because a maggot that stayed too long would eventually pupate inside your body, would transform into a fly while still embedded in your tissue. There are court records describing nobles who could hear buzzing inside their wounds, who felt movement weeks after treatment as flies hatched and tried to escape through the same holes they de-entered as larvae. Some physicians began keeping detailed journals of their maggot treatments, recording which wounds healed best, which patients tolerated the procedure longest, which types of infections responded most favorably to larval therapy. These journals make for absolutely horrifying reading, because the physicians wrote with such clinical detachment about procedures that seem like something from a horror film. They described the color and consistency of the tissue the maggots consumed, the sounds patients made during treatment, the exact moment when screaming turned to whimpering turned to silence as the mind simply shut down from trauma. But here's the thing that should terrify you. This wasn't cruelty. This was compassion. This was the best medicine available. Without the maggots, these infections would have turned septic, would have spread through the bloodstream, would have killed quickly and painfully. The maggot cure, as revolting as it was, actually saved lives. The mortality rate for infected wounds treated with maggots was significantly lower than those treated with any other medieval method. Now, let me tell you about what happened to the women, because if you thought the maggot cure was bad, the gynecological applications will make you understand why so many noblewomen died young, and why the ones who survived often went mad. In the 17th and 18th centuries European, royal courts developed an entire branch of medicine dedicated specifically to female reproductive health. And every single treatment sounds like it was designed by someone who hated women and had an unlimited supply of nightmares. Consider the case of Queen Mary, II of England, who died in 1694 from smallpox. But before the smallpox killed her, her physicians subjected her to a series of treatments for what they called female hysteria, and womb sickness that involved inserting live maggots not into external wounds, but into her vaginal canal. The theory was that the womb, being an internal organ, could develop internal rot that needed to be cleaned, just like any external wound. So physicians would cultivate special larvae, smaller and supposedly more gentle than the blowfly maggots used for regular wounds, and insert them directly into the uterus using long silver tubes. The patient would be strapped down because the natural instinct was to thrash and scream and try to escape. The maggots would be left inside for anywhere from 6 hours to 3 days, during which time the woman would feel them moving, feeding, reproducing. Because yes, sometimes the maggots would mature and lay eggs while still inside the body, creating a second generation of larvae that would need to be flushed out with wine or vinegar, or sometimes mercury solutions that were probably more toxic than the infection they were treating. The removal process for internal maggot treatments was even more traumatic than external applications. Physicians developed special instruments, essentially medieval versions of speculums, that would hold the vaginal opening wide while they used hooks, yes hooks, to extract the larvae one by one. But here's where the sarcasm breaks through the horror. They thought they were being humane. They genuinely believed that this excruciating violation was preferable to letting the woman die from infection. And statistically, they weren't entirely wrong. Women who underwent maggot treatment for puerperal fever, the infection that killed countless new mothers, had a slightly higher survival rate than those who received no treatment at all. Slightly. We're talking maybe a 5% improvement. But in an era where childbirth was the leading cause of death for women of reproductive age, 5% was considered a miracle. So the treatment continued, generation after generation, with royal physicians writing proud treatises about their success rates while completely ignoring the psychological devastation they were inflicting. There are letters from noblewomen describing the treatments, and the language they use is revealing. They don't describe pain. They describe violation. They don't complain about physical discomfort. They write about feeling invaded, about having their bodies turned into vessels for something inhuman. One French countess wrote that after her maggot treatment for a uterine infection, she could never again tolerate intimacy with her husband because she couldn't stop imagining the feeling of things crawling inside her. But the maggot cure wasn't even the strangest part of royal gynecological medicine. Physicians also developed something called fumigation therapy, specifically for women's reproductive health. And this procedure makes the maggots look almost civilized. The patient would be positioned over a specially designed chair with a hole in the seat. Beneath the chair, physicians would burn a mixture of herbs, animal fat, and sometimes human remains to create thick, acrid smoke. This smoke would be directed upward through the hole, directly into the patient's vagina, the theory being that the smoke would purify the womb and drive out evil humors. Sessions could last for hours, with the woman essentially being slowly smoked like a piece of meat while physicians stood around, taking notes and debating the proper temperature and composition of the smoke. But here is the detail that transforms this from merely horrifying to genuinely surreal. They would often add maggots to the smoking mixture. Live maggots thrown onto hot coals where they would writhe and pop and release whatever chemicals their bodies contained into the smoke. The physicians believed that the essence of the maggots, their natural ability to clean wounds, would be transferred through the smoke into the patient's body. So women weren't just being fumigated, they were inhaling vaporized maggot while simultaneously having smoke forced into their most intimate areas. The combination treatment, smoke and larvae, was considered the absolute cutting edge of medical science. The psychological toll of these treatments is almost impossible to quantify because the women who endured them were taught from birth that suffering was their duty, that pain was their inheritance as daughters of Eve, that to complain about medical procedures was to be ungrateful for the care they were receiving. Court records show that women who refused maggot treatment or fumigation therapy were sometimes declared mentally incompetent and forcibly treated anyway. There are documented cases of noblewomen being strapped to treatment chairs while they screamed and begged, while their own families watched and approved, because refusing treatment was seen as refusing life itself. And perhaps most disturbing of all, sometimes it worked. Not always, not even most of the time, but enough that the treatments continued for centuries. Enough that physicians could point to survivors and say, "See, this is effective medicine." The survival rate might have been low, the psychological damage might have been catastrophic, but in a world where the alternative was certain death from infection, even a small chance of survival made these nightmare procedures seem rational. That's what makes this story so deeply unsettling. It wasn't sadism, it was hope. It was desperate, misguided, scientifically ignorant hope that manifested as systematic torture performed with the best of intentions. The maggots weren't punishment, they were salvation. And the women who survived these treatments, who lived to bear children and continue royal bloodlines, they became the champions of the very procedures that had traumatized them, because they couldn't admit, even to themselves, that they'd endured something monstrous for possibly no benefit at all.